A little bit of a change in format this week here on the Wrestling Beat. Normally it's analysis work and a look back on what happened in this week's, professional wrestling world. But I was lucky enough to secure an interview with the Solomonster, host of Solomonster Sounds Off, a really successful professional wrestling podcast, which drops every Sunday on Stitcher and iTunes and wherever podcasts are available, with the host of the show, the Solomonster. And I reached out to the Solomonster over email a couple of weeks ago, and he was kind and gracious enough to come on the Wrestling Beat here on Dublin South FM, and he was more than generous with his time and everything else. And it was a really great conversation I had with him, where I got to pick his brain about the current day product and what's going on over in the WWE, and we spoke a little bit about the Irish wrestling scene here in Dublin, of course. So without any further ado, I want to introduce my conversation with the Solomonster himself.
Joined via Skype all the way from Brooklyn, New York, the Solomonster himself, Jason Solomon. Jason, welcome to the Wrestling Beat.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Really appreciate you coming on, and of course congrats on your 11th year in the podcast world. You just reached your 11th year last week, I believe, wasn't it?
I did, yeah. 11 years makes me feel old.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of interested to hear how the podcast came about, because 11 years ago, I mean, now everybody seems to have a podcast. Going back to 2007, the landscape is quite different. What made you kind of pick up the microphone?
Well, I had a friend who was starting a wrestling news website, and he was looking for original content. He didn't just want it to be a copy and paste, just post news kind of thing. And we had a conversation, and I said, well, why don't I try doing an audio show? Because back then they were called audio shows. You didn't really hear the word podcast too much. And so I started out doing it for that purpose, and there were a few short shows that I did. Over time, it just grew into something that people seemed to enjoy. It was building an audience, and it just sort of spiraled from there. It became a kind of a passion project for me. Eventually, I split away from the site, branched out on my own, and it's just grown ever since.
Yeah, so when did you realize that it was the show itself started to gain some sort of traction and it had a following? Was it kind of a happy accident? I mean, obviously you were putting in the work, but it was quite the unknown. The medium was so young back then.
Yeah, and it's tough too, because and anybody who starts any kind of podcast or YouTube show, it's not easy to build an audience because nobody really knows you exist. And so a big part of it is you got to learn how to promote yourself, how to advertise yourself. Social media is an important part of it. I think Twitter, Facebook, all those things were important. When did I realize it? It's hard to say. I would say within probably after maybe 3 or 4 years of doing it is when it finally started to hit me that this could be potentially one day more than just a hobby or something I just did on the side as kind of a fun thing to do. And then once I took the show independently away from the website, which was kind of a scary thing to do, I didn't know what to expect. Here I had a built-in audience, and now I'm kind of going off on my own. And when my audience not only didn't shrink, but it started to grow, I think at that point I said, okay, then there's real potential to build this up a little bit more.
I suppose you talk a lot about, promoting yourself and that kind of thing, and using social media as a tool. I think one of the hardest aspects of when you spoke about this on the Sound Off a couple of weeks back and a little bit last week too, of the actual work that goes in to producing a show. Now, the show I do, the Wrestling Beat, I intended it. I was modeling it after your show. I wanted to do it by myself, and admittedly, I did a couple of shows alone, and I found it to be one of the most difficult things I've ever actually done. To sit there with a microphone and to create content, and you think you have so much material, and you look at the clock and you're 4 minutes in or something. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's a weird thing when you're doing a solo show, basically talk to yourself. When I was first doing my show, the shows, like I said, were a lot shorter than they are now. Anybody who listens to my show knows that they can, these could be 2.5 hour shows. And you've got to really, you got to have your notes, you've got to know your stuff. You have a whole bunch of shows you have to watch. So you have to prepare and put the work in. At the end of the day, though, you're still sitting here by yourself, kind of just talking into a microphone. So I think there are people who don't like shows like that, and then there are people who maybe aren't fond of co-hosted shows. There's something for everybody out there. I never really had an interest in doing the co-host thing. I just sort of grew into doing it my way, and my way worked for me, and people seemed to enjoy it, so I just ran with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for doing a solo show because, I mean, I don't know if I mentioned to you before, but I mean, outside of actual wrestling personalities such as, the Bruce Pritchards and Steve Austins, your show would be the only show that I would listen to who is a non-wrestling personality, if that makes sense.
Yeah, believe me, I hear from a lot of people who listen to all types of podcasts, and I'll get messages saying, look, I don't even watch the product anymore. I just listen to your stuff just to keep up with what's going on Raw and SmackDown. And it's something I do when I'm doing laundry or if I'm on my way to work. I mean, I love getting messages and emails like that because it just, sometimes you can forget that it doesn't seem like a big deal to wrestling podcasts. It's not anything to get too serious about, but to a lot of people, it's part of their weekly routine. And it's become kind of a big part of their weekly lives, and that's pretty cool. If you're a host, that's pretty cool to hear stuff like that.
It is, and I mean, I've always looked forward. When you mentioned it was 11 years recently, I think I've been with you for 6 or 7 of those years, and I came across you through TV Tracks. That must have been a huge tool for you, was it? Looking back.
Yeah, and the way that worked was Trax was a big fan of my show. His channel had been around for a few years before he picked me up. And he just approached me one day and said, look, would you be comfortable with me posting snippets of your show? I took one look at his subscriber count, and I said, absolutely. Because I was still at the time building my own YouTube channel up as sort of a separate thing and building my show. I said, sure, go for it. And he'll link back to my social media. He'll link back to my website. And it didn't take very long. I started to see a huge increase in the number of people who were listening to me. And I did a survey once. And in the survey, I put a question, how did you hear about my show? And I would say the vast majority of those people cited Trax as the very first place that they heard my show. It led them to the full show. And they just started listening to the full episode. So, yeah, I mean, it was a huge thing for me. And it's, he's taking a break at the moment, but we've had a good relationship now for a very long time. And again, it just started because he was a fan.
Yeah, and I used to, browsing around on YouTube years ago, and you would come across how he packaged those clips for you, you know what I mean, with the snippets. That's how I got kind of hooked on it, because I think a lot of, doing analysis work, essentially, and review work, to make it successful, I mean, I do find you always try to find the good in even stuff that wasn't so good, if that makes sense. That's kind of a weird...
I try. It's getting harder every week, but I try.
It is, and I mean, I really want to talk to you about what's going on currently, and if we could really want to get your take on, I know we spoke about a lot on Sound Offs recently, but the Roman Reigns situation as a whole, I mean, has there been anything that hasn't been so not meant to be for all intents and purposes? Like, I mean, and this is not a knock on Roman for getting sick. I mean, I lost my own brother to leukemia 10 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, I know you've spoke a lot about the stuff that's been in your life too, but when you look at the Roman thing as a whole, it really just wasn't meant to be at all, was it?
Yeah, it just seemed like there were so many forces working against him. I guess it kind of seems like it wasn't meant to be in a way, because it just seemed like one problem after another, whether it was the fans turning against him, or he would get suspended, or he would get injured. Now this. So, yeah, it kind of feels that way. It feels like it just wasn't meant to be. Hopefully he's able to make it back. And I still say, if he's able to beat this thing and make it back, he'll be the biggest babyface in the world. So it'll be very interesting when that day comes and he makes his return, how he is received by the fans. Because remember, it's not just the whole sympathy factor. I think there's something to be said for absence makes the heart grow fonder. And he was obviously one of the more pushed people on that television show. He had 4 or 5 straight WrestleMania main events. It's easy for people to just get tired, to grow sick and tired of you. And so we'll see, hopefully he's able to make it back. If just him being away for a year or 2 years, whatever it ends up being, people might be clamoring for him to make his comeback. And maybe he can kind of turn things around, because I would agree. It just seems like the forces of nature were working against him at every turn.
Yeah, it wasn't meant to be, but I agree with you 100%. If he ever does come back, obviously, when it goes without saying, I mean, it's the man, Joe Anawai, who has, I mean, leukemia. So if he can just survive it full stop, who knows if he could ever, you know what I mean? That's obviously going to take a back burner. It's going to take, you know what I mean? It's not going to take center stage. Life comes first, you know?
Of course, absolutely.
I mean, with Roman gone, who would you like to see the company elevate? I mean, I know it's looking like it's going to be Drew McIntyre. But ideally, in an ideal world, who would you like to see them put in Roman's position?
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, I think they would sign Kenny Omega and just put him in that position. I don't know that I want Kenny Omega to sign with WWE because I don't know that I have enough faith in them to do the right thing and use him in that role. But I look at him, and he's in the prime of his career right now. He, obviously is a champion elsewhere. He's proven that he's able to, hang with the top talent. He's a very good wrestler, but he could also do the comedy thing. I mean, he seems like somebody who would fit in well there if they used him properly. So, fantasy scenario, if I knew they were going to do right by him, he would be the guy. If I look at NXT, I think a guy who could get called up tomorrow and probably would do well, I don't want to say in Roman's spot, but in a top spot like that on Raw, would be Aleister Black. And I don't know what their plans are for him as far as moving him up. He's got a little feud going in NXT right now, but I think if they called up Aleister Black, he could also fill those shoes. But I also think Drew is probably the person that they're grooming, and I think that's great because I think Drew, he looks the part, and I think he would do well.
Has the WWE not kind of built up a little bit of faith in you on how they would possibly treat a Kenny Omega? And if you could look at the AJ Styles situation for that, I mean, when AJ debuted in the Rumble a couple of years back, I mean, I can't remember what your take on it was at the time, but I certainly didn't have high hopes for what they would do with him. But they've done pretty right by him, don't you agree?
Yeah, I think he's a rare case. In a lot of ways, he's a rare case. I mean, here's a guy who completely bypassed NXT. That doesn't happen very often. I mean, I don't want to say every single person like that has to go through or has gone through NXT, because there might be one or two others I'm not thinking of. But that was a rare thing in and of itself, that he kept his name, that he didn't have to go to NXT like everybody else and all the other TNA people like Samoa Joe and Bobby Roode. They all passed through NXT first. And to put him on TV right away in a prime spot in the Royal Rumble, he was working Chris Jericho 2 months later at WrestleMania. He worked back-to-back pay-per-view main events with Roman Reigns. And then the whole feud with John Cena, which I think was huge, pinning John Cena clean at SummerSlam. So he's sort of an anomaly in a lot of ways. I would say if you created a chart and you had the kind of the plus column and the minus column, with WWE's track record with some of these people, I would think the minus column might have more names than the plus column. And so, hey, prove me wrong. That's what I say. If he signs with them and they push him to the moon, great. But they've made a lot of very questionable talent moves that, just AJ aside, doesn't give me a lot of kind of hope is the right word. But I question if they see him as being that sort of person that they could build around. I think he could be. And I guess we'll know in a few months, depending on what he does, if he gets that opportunity.
I mean, if they're willing to, I suppose they haven't really gone all in with AJ. I mean, with him being champion of SmackDown, I think it's a little bit different as opposed to him taking Raw. I think age probably played a bit of a factor there. I think a lot of their hesitation as well to put the belt on Samoa Joe has to be age related too.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Well, age, and also just the fact that he's had, a number of injuries, even going back to NXT. And I wonder if that's maybe scaring them off a little bit. And yeah, the whole thing with AJ is weird. I don't know that it's necessarily them looking at AJ and saying, well, he's 41, and so we don't want to go all in on him. I just think it's the Raw SmackDown thing, where Raw is always going to be their baby, and AJ happens to have the SmackDown title. And so, unfortunately, the WWE champion is typically slotted, way under where the Universal champion would be. If the roles were reversed, I think that AJ might be the one headlining a lot of these pay-per-views and not, Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns. So I think that also has a little something to do with that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of, I suppose, the issue with with the age thing and the AJ stuff as well, and the reason why they have to keep going back to this sort of stuff is, I mean, I wanted to really ask you about too is, do you think we're entering some sort of a weird new realm with this Saudi Arabia stuff and the way it's luring all these bigger, older stars back for one more kind of run? It's really strange because I don't know about you, but well, I suppose you did mention it on your podcast how like you just weren't excited at all for the HBK return, and I thought I would have been. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just think it's too much all at once. You know, if Shawn Michaels was the only older name at the moment who was being lured back, and they could sort of just not build around him, like build a company around him, but just build around his return as being this big thing, I think that would have been fine. But it was Shawn Michaels, and it was The Undertaker, and it was Triple H, and he had Kurt Angle wrestling on that show, and then the rumors of Hulk Hogan, and it's just on and on and on, and they bring all of these people back at once, and it just feels like, Old Timers Day at Yankee Stadium or something. It's too much at once, and therefore, when you do that, it doesn't have the same effect that it maybe used to have. If Batista would come back and have a big match. When Brock first came back, that was huge. That was a big deal. Whenever The Rock would come back, that was a big deal. And now it feels like they're constantly bringing back big names all at once. And it's like, oh, all right, well, here's the next one. And it just loses its appeal.
It does. It cheapens it too. I mean, and if Shawn is to come back for another one more match, do you think it's so diluted that no one's going to care again? Do you know what I mean? Or can they kind of salvage it and do something right with them and program them properly?
Yeah, no, they can absolutely do something with it. I think, let's say if he was coming back for WrestleMania, and I don't know that he is. He said that he's done. He certainly didn't sound like he was interested in coming back for, any singles matches when they interviewed him after that Crown Jewel show. Although, judging by how that match went, I don't blame him. But if they built a big Shawn Michaels matchup for WrestleMania against like an AJ Styles or someone of that caliber, yeah, of course, it can get over huge. It's all in how you build it, though. If they have a good story and they want to tell that story, and it's not trotting 5 old guys out there for 5 different matches at WrestleMania, you focus just, let's say, on HBK's match and maybe one other one, I think that there would be a lot of people interested in that.
Yeah, my impression of that post-match interview you're speaking of is I didn't get the impression he was in particularly good form. He had just landed on his face. I'd imagine he wasn't happy with that, and maybe he was a bit emotional in answering that question. So I'd imagine he's probably going to come back for one more.
Well, I mean, before that, the rumors that I had heard, and I mean, we'll see if this gets borne out or not, but I had heard from different people that, he was all signed up for multiple matches.
Mm-hmm.
He was going to wrestle The Undertaker, and he was going to have a match against this person and that person, possibly even wrestle 2 shows WrestleMania weekend, the NXT show and the WrestleMania show. I don't know if I buy that. I find that hard to believe, but we'll see. And then he said what he said at Crown Jewel, and maybe you're right. Maybe he just felt like, but that's kind of what I was getting at too. It wasn't just that the match was, I thought, bad, but looking at the way things played out, maybe he himself just felt like, yeah, I can still do it, but man, I'm tired, or man, this hurts me. And if he's worried at all about how people might perceive him, and he doesn't want to be looked at as somebody who came back less than he used to be, maybe he had that realization in his head, and he said, you know what, I think this is good enough for me. But I have heard those rumors about him coming back for more singles matches, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
Speaking of, I suppose, someone who's past pasture in that regard, The Undertaker, are you surprised at how he has hung on? I would have thought The Undertaker would have been the last person to hang on and kind of let himself go in the way he has. It's really, really surprised me.
No, I can't say I'm surprised, because this is what happens with most wrestlers. Most wrestlers, if they don't retire, they say, well, when I turn 40, that's going to be it for me. I remember Booker T. He did an interview and he said, I don't know if it was 40 or like a certain age. When I hit that number, I'm done. And of course, he continued wrestling well beyond that. And even now, when he gets interviewed, he says, look, if WWE wanted me to come back for one more match, I would happily come back for one more match. So you look at a guy like The Undertaker, he was wrestling one match a year.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny because now he's wrestling so much more. But for so many years, he wrestled one match a year. So if you're The Undertaker and WWE is going to flash, I'm just spitting a number out here, but let's say it's $1 million. Maybe he has a contract for $1 million, downside guarantee. And all you need to do to make that money is wrestle one match a year. Wouldn't you do the same thing?
Absolutely. There's no two ways about it. Absolutely. Money talks. But I would have assumed, on just reading about him, hearing little snippets about his personality, you would have assumed he might have been the one exception. Much like Shawn would have been.
Yeah. And Shawn was for so long until they flashed a whole bunch of money in his face. That's what I mean. It comes down to money. It's a business. These are business people. The only person who's really stuck to his guns, and I maybe I shouldn't say anything because now watch, he'll come back, but was Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that may have more to do, I tend to think that may have more to do with him in his head thinking, look, I just wouldn't be medically cleared. And so I'm not going to, I'll do interviews and say, well, I could come back if I wanted to, but I don't want to come back, at 80% of what I used to be. I'm not sure he would get cleared anyway, but he's really the only big name like that I could think of who retired. He had his retirement match, even though we didn't know it was his retirement match going in. And it's been, what's it been now? 15 years, maybe, since that match?
2003.
Yeah, and he has stayed away. But Undertaker did an interview in 2002 before WrestleMania that year, and he flat out said, I'm not going to be one of those guys who's out there past his prime. And it is kind of sad because, look, I'm not saying he doesn't at least try to keep himself in good shape. He's in better shape than I am, probably. But you see him out there, and he's all gassed, and he's moving slow, and dropping people or not catching people on a moonsault as he did at that show. And it's sad, but like I said, at the end of the day, it's a business. It's all about money.
Absolutely. I think with The Undertaker too, you could probably forgive him being out of shape or having cardio issues. It's when he's blowing spots. That's the surprising part of it. You know what I mean? It's like, is that real? Am I actually watching this? It's strange.
Yeah, it is strange, but that's what happens. Like, I think of the Roman Reigns match at WrestleMania last year, which was really embarrassing. That, to me, it was a real mistake for him. And apparently he's feeling a little bit better now. He had some kind of hip operation, and maybe that's why he's able to wrestle a little more often. Good for him. Good for his bank account. But WrestleMania last year, he had a bad match, and they did that ending where he left his gear in the ring. And then he sort of vanished into a plume of smoke. And I thought, you know what? I can't really think of a better way for the Undertaker character to ride off into the sunset than that. And I said, I just hope they don't bring him back next year and sort of ruin the moment, which is exactly what they did. They brought him back, or he opted to come back. But I remember in that match, there was a really embarrassing sequence where I think he was trying to pick up Roman, or maybe Roman picked him up for a tombstone. And they were clearly going for the reversal where they would fall backwards and Undertaker would pick him up. And Undertaker Roman couldn't pick him up because Undertaker couldn't push himself feet first, couldn't push himself off the mat. They just sort of fell down. And then they tried it again, and he fell down. And I looked away because I was so embarrassed by what I was seeing. So when you mention blown spots, that's the first thing I think of. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it just reminds you that some guys just hold on a little too long.
It's as though he's trying to right his wrongs. Do you know what I mean? It's like he's trying to have another career resurgence like he had in 2007. Do you remember 2007, Solomonster, when he cut all that weight? Remember, he had abs. He was in the best shape of his life. It's like he's trying to right those wrongs or something. Do you know what I mean? It's like he's trying to go out on a good one this time.
Well, I just don't think that's going to happen. That's the thing. The weird thing about him is he was around for so long. And Undertaker in the 1990s, let's be honest, he was not known as, he's a great wrestler. He's not known for great wrestling matches. He was known for being the Undertaker, right? He was the entrance and the music. And then as he got older and more beat up, something really weird happened. All of a sudden, he became known for having great matches. it was sort of like his career was in reverse. Normally you have great matches, and then when you can't physically do that stuff anymore, you rely more on your character and your personality, and you sort of do the bare minimum and still get over. But in the 2000s, he was on a tear. He was having great matches, those WrestleMania matches with Edge and Shawn Michaels, Triple H. And so, yeah, he went through that phase, but it's been so long since then. He's gotten older. He's gotten more beat up. He's 53, I want to say, 52, 53 years old, not getting any younger. You know, at some point, you just got to look yourself in the mirror and say, look, I've done all I can do. I don't have anything left to prove. I could still contribute. I could still make appearances and do things, but I don't know, to carry on like this, that Crown Jewel match left a bad taste, I think, in a lot of people's mouths. He's obviously not done. I mean, clearly he'll have a match of some kind at WrestleMania. I've given up at this point figuring when his last WrestleMania match is. People have been asking when's his last WrestleMania match going to be for the last 13 years. He'll finish when he's ready to finish. I hope it's not because he suffers a major injury. That's the only thing I hope.
Like a Sting. I mean, how sad was that in 2014 or whenever it was that Sting finally got to come in? Like, I mean, I know you were, I think, over here in Ireland anyway in the late 90s. I certainly wasn't getting WCW on TV, so it was never an option for me. But I know you were probably a Sting fan.
Yeah, I was well aware of Sting going back even to the early 90s when he wore the colorful face paint and had the crew cut. So Sting was one of my, if I had to pick favorites in WCW, I was never the biggest WCW fan, but Sting was always on my list. So I was well aware of his history. And, we were just talking about The Undertaker. Again, I look at it, I think, what a huge missed opportunity, because you have WrestleMania 31, which was 3 years ago now. That was Sting's one and only WrestleMania match. It was him against Triple H. And they built it up like some kind of match that everybody was clamoring for. I don't know about you and your wrestling friends. I didn't have any wrestling friends who for years were clamoring for Sting to wrestle Triple H. That wasn't the match, I think. That would have been match number one for him on our list.
No, nor I.
And that was a comeback year for The Undertaker. He had such a horrible showing the year before. He came back. He seemed to be in better shape. And it just seemed like it was two matches, him and Bray and then Sting and Triple H, that nobody was asking for. The match they were asking for was Sting against The Undertaker. And Sting has since said that it was his choice to lose to Triple H because he thought it was going to be possibly his last match. Why in the world, then, wouldn't you not have done Undertaker against Sting and then have Undertaker beat him? And it's just stuff like that really annoys me because to you and I, it just seems like such an easy decision to make. And you ask yourself, how come they couldn't see it? I always thought that match was a license to print money, but now, unfortunately, with Sting's injury, it can't happen.
Maybe it's one of those things to be optimistic about it. Maybe we're better off not seeing it, you know what I mean? Because what would happen with Sting the following year, I think it was that September, he went down with that injury, wasn't it? It
was, later that same year. But I'm looking at it in the context of you could have just had Sting come in for one match.
Yeah.
And that would have been, because he, even to this day, he can't let it go. He says, if I was to come back, I would only want to face one person. That's The Undertaker. So you could have brought Sting in for one WrestleMania match. That could have been his only WWE match. And I remember on my show at the time pitching the idea well before that. I said, you've got the perfect setup for this. You bill it as you could bill it as a retirement match where the loser has to retire. Or you could have billed it as a double retirement match to make things even more interesting, knowing going in that both guys, it's their last match. Who's going to win their last match? Right? But even if it was a one-way stiff, tell me that match wouldn't have been big. I mean, come on. That would have been a huge match. You go into it knowing at least one of these guys' career is going to be over. It would have made for a nice moment. But you're right in that I think the entrances would have been the highlight.
Yeah.
Once the bell rang. It might have been an all bets are off kind of situation. You look at the Sting match with Triple H, and it was all smoke and mirrors. I mean, you had the NWO come out, DX came out. So with Taker and Sting, you would have had to have,
Taker and Sting.
You would have had to have, gimmicks and stuff. But who cares? I mean, that's what people wanted to see. Even if it was just the entrances, it would have made for a cool moment at WrestleMania.
Yeah, I mean, we're conditioned to kind of buy into, I mean, I certainly enjoy the pomp and circumstance, the bravado, the stories, as opposed to the in-ring stuff too. I would have bought it absolutely, but it is one of those things that just didn't happen. And I mean, clearly the Undertaker was only starting to get going back then. He had no plans to hang it up.
Yeah, apparently not. Every time you think the guy's, nearing his end, somehow he soldiers on. Look, I have to think with somebody like him, who's been doing this for so long, and you go out there and he gets great reactions every time he comes out. He's got the best entrance in wrestling. I don't know. I mean, to me, there's no debate about it. Over the years, his entrance has changed a little bit, but it's still the best wrestler entrance, I think, in history. So to go out there, it's got to be a rush for him to play that character, to go out there and to still at his age get that kind of reaction. It's probably hard for him to let that go. That's why do you look at some of these independent shows and you see Greg Valentine, who looks like a woman at this point. I mean, he goes out there, and it's sad that at his age, I mean, maybe the money is still good. I don't know, but guys like that should be able to enjoy some form of retirement, and he's wrestling in front of 75 people, taking bumps at 60 years old. And I think it's kind of sad.
It's what they do, though, isn't it? They probably don't know what else to do when you spend so much of your life being ingrained in that.
Well, yeah, and that's part of it. So I don't know what his financial situation is. Maybe he has to work.
Yeah.
If he has to work, then who am I to say that he shouldn't be working? But I find that sad.
It is.
He shouldn't be in that position. But that's the wrestling business, right? There's no retirement plan. There's no 401k. You just make your money. And a lot of those guys, I'm sure back then, they made it and they spent it. And that's what happens.
Speaking of retirement matches and stuff like that, with this Saudi Arabia thing, if there was one person, one wrestler that you would choose to bring back for one more match at one of these shows in an ideal world, who would that be? I know you're a big Bret Hart guy. If Bret was in a position to come back, would that be something you'd be interested in seeing?
It would have been, yeah. I mean, at this point, Bret would be in his mid-50s. So even a healthy Bret Hart at this age, I don't know that I would have a huge interest in it. If Bret did not suffer the stroke and the concussions and all the injuries that he had, ideally, I would have loved to have seen him back in the mid-2000s when he could have mixed it up with Kurt Angle. To me, Bret Hart and Kurt Angle was always like a fantasy match for me. And then when Shawn came back, that would have been another one, because you have this natural feud to build off of. I mean, the story sells itself. And I'm not so sure, looking at some of the matches that Shawn had in the second half of his career, that he and Bret couldn't have gone out there, all those years later and had a better match than any match they ever had before.
Yep.
So I think we really missed out. And that's not to say their Iron Man match wasn't really good, even if I think it's overrated. But I think that Bret Hart, a healthy Bret, and Shawn Michaels, sometime in the mid to late 2000s, would have made for an incredible match at WrestleMania. So, yeah, Bret would be one. The other one, to answer your question, would be Stone Cold.
Mm-hmm.
He still is one of the biggest, if not the biggest. I mean, somebody sent me a link earlier today, ironically, on YouTube to one of his big crowd pops from, back in the Attitude Era. And it was stunning to just go back and listen to that, because nobody these days gets that kind of reaction anymore. This guy was just larger than life. And I think when he retired and went away, a lot of wrestling fans retired and went away. And I think he might be the one guy, if he was healthy, who could come back. And if you promoted a big comeback match for him, let's say at WrestleMania, he could get a lot of those lapsed fans to come back one more time and watch him wrestle.
Possibly, I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get people to come back and stay with the network. Who do they program him with, though? I mean, at the top of your head, who would come to mind for Steve Austin? I know 7 years ago, everybody would have jumped on the CM Punk bandwagon. Nowadays, who could you program a Stone Cold Steve Austin with for one more?
Well, I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. It maybe somebody from NXT. I'd have to think about that.
Yeah.
The first name that just jumped in my head was Samoa Joe or Kevin Owens. And that's because Joe and Owens are two of the best talkers in the entire company. And I think more important than the match itself is the build-up to that match. So I look at the roster and I say, well, Austin was a trash talker. Who could go toe-to-toe with him and try to trash talk him back on the microphone? I think of Joe, and I think of Owens. And they're brawlers, just like he was. So I think either one of those matches would be bad. I mean, to a mainstream audience, probably not Kevin Owens. Maybe he wouldn't be the ideal opponent, but in terms of just building a big wrestling match and having the promos back and forth, it probably would be one of those two guys.
You know, before I let you go, I suppose I have to speak about the feud that never was with the person. I always got the impression you were a big fan of him, like I am. It's just past midnight over here in Ireland where I'm recording this. It's just gone November 13th, which, of course, can you believe it's been 13 years since we lost Eddie Guerrero?
Yeah, I mentioned that on my show last week. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, especially when his wife has since become a character and retired. Actually, she became a character and then she retired, and his daughter is in the business, and it just feels like a lifetime ago. I remember, there's a lot that I remember about that period. I remember when I heard the announcement, and kind of like I remember when I heard about the Benoit news, which is not a fun thing to remember. But I remember hearing about that, and it was one of those devastating things because he was a beloved character on the show, and he was a top guy. It wasn't just some random person. He was a major player and just beloved by so many people, and it was such a sudden, shocking thing. He wasn't even 40 years old. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of wrestlers like that who never hit the age of 40. You know, I think back to Owen Hart sometimes, and I think to myself, he was only 34. I'm older than him now.
Yeah.
It's hard for me, like, 34 is like a kid. I didn't look at Owen Hart as being a kid, but that's what he was. It's just, I don't know. It's one of those things that's sort of hard to reconcile. But yeah, it's 13 years, and you still feel his influence today. I just watched the finale of Lucha Underground, and they did a segment basically honoring him. His daughter was there, Chavo was there. He was doing the Three Amigos. So the one cool thing is that it's been 13 years, but people still chant his name. You know, they haven't forgotten about him.
A very strong following still. I mean, I suppose what's harder, I think, to kind of accept is the domino effect it had when he died. You know what I mean? With the stuff that happened a year and a half later. And I was only saying this on my show a couple of weeks ago to my co-host Mick, that I hate to use that word, but I don't like the fact that we can't speak about Eddie without mentioning Benoit too. It taints us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they were so linked that I can understand why people do that. So yeah, it does. It sucks, but I could also understand it because they were obviously they were best friends and they worked together a lot. They came into the company together in WCW. They wrestled, a whole bunch of matches together. So you think of one, you think of the other. And I can't think of two. You think of Eddie, and people just, this beloved guy. It's so sad that he's not here anymore. You think of Benoit, it's just a 180. It's unbelievable to look back now and see how one person is remembered and how the other person is remembered. These were two of the most respected people, I think, ever in the wrestling business, and their legacies took two totally different paths, and it's really sad.
One has a legacy and the other it doesn't. It is sad, but it really, really is. But 13 years since Eddie is gone. But I do have one more thing just to pick your brain about, Solomonster, if you don't mind. Our very own Becky Lynch. Are you surprised of how the company have let her become this anti-hero, which is the way I would describe her character? And I haven't heard that word kind of be used, but that's the way I would view Becky Lynch's character right now.
I think that's how she is portraying her character. I don't know that I would say that the company is sort of encouraging it or that was their idea. I am happy that they seem to be letting her do her thing and they're not trying to just completely kill it, even though they have tried very hard to get people to boo her and they just don't want to.
Yeah.
So I think it's in spite of the company that she has sort of become this anti-hero figure. Look, maybe it all is just to build her up so she can lose to Ronda Rousey on Sunday. I hope that's not the plan. I hope that's not the idea. they've stumbled into something here that's pretty special. We have not had a female performer, I don't think, unless you want to count Ronda maybe, but I don't know that we've had a female performer who has kind of struck a chord and gotten over the way that she has. We've had some male performers who have gotten over, Daniel Bryan, right? The fans were just chanting for him every single week. But I don't think we've ever seen this before with one of the women. And she was so marginalized for so long and just sitting in the back and doing nothing and losing, and people just got sick and tired of it because they really liked her. And so they took to her. And if I were WWE, I mean, I'm all in on Becky Lynch. If it were me, Becky Lynch wins at Survivor Series. Not cleanly, I'm sure. But if it were me, I think it would be a big mistake to beat her on Sunday.
It would surely send her on her way, I think. Is there an element of how she's been so accepted over there, of her being Irish? There's something different, and I'm not saying that from a biased point of view, but there is something different about our kind of personality. I mean, look at the kind of, yourselves over there, kind of, a lot of you kind of ate Conor McGregor up at the start. You loved that kind of trash talk, and I know things have certainly might have soured on him a little bit, especially with the drama he caused in New York a couple of months ago. But is there kind of more of an acceptance to Irish kind of personas and personalities over there?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a newfound acceptance. I've never gotten the impression that there was anything other than an acceptance of it. I mean, it's kind of funny where I work in New York, in the city. There's a lot. You definitely see the Irish influence in a lot of different places, and not just because we have an Irish pub every other block, it seems like, in New York. I can tell you that whenever I'm out socially, some of the places I usually have the most fun in are typically in those places, and just interacting with people. But no, I mean, I think that it's unique in that we haven't had too many men or women who, of Irish descent who have become big stars in the company. You could probably point to a few. I think it just adds to her charm. Mm-hmm. I think people, I don't know, maybe it has more to do with her being a redhead. Who knows? I don't know that any of that really has to do with the way that she's gotten over. I think it's just that she's likable. I think people think that she's a good wrestler. She's good at what she does. And because she was so... like I said, marginalized for so long, and Charlotte was the one who was pushed, and Charlotte is the chosen one, and then Carmella. People just got tired of it and said, hey, when's Becky going to have her turn? And when she finally got it, look, I was watching SummerSlam, and when she attacked Charlotte when the match was over, that was clearly meant to be a heel moment, and people went nuts. It was one of the biggest reactions I've seen all year for anything on WWE television. I don't think that's because she's Irish, or she's a redhead, or she's a woman. It's because people like her. People got sick and tired of them not doing anything with her. And now the reactions that she gets and everything, this is people's way of expressing themselves and saying, we're going to stand up for her. This is who we've chosen. It's not Charlotte. It's not Carmella. It's not anybody else. This is the person who we have chosen. And the sky's the limit as far as how big she could become. I think that she and Ronda belong in the main event on Sunday. Do they have the guts to do it? I don't know. We'll see. I would much rather they get the main event than Brock Lesnar in a 4-minute match.
Yeah, I mean, he's 1 foot at the door, seemingly for forever. It's the strangest thing. It's almost like that gif, Joe from The Simpsons, of Grandpa Simpson walking in, putting on the hat, putting down the hat.
Yeah, Vince McMahon calling out, hey, we got a new contract for you, when he comes back. Well, please. I mean, there's nobody has a better job than Brock Lesnar for the amount of work that he's expected to put in, and the money I'm sure he's making, and the effort that he seems to sometimes put into it. He's got a nice, cushy gig. Same thing. If I were him, why would you ever want to give that up? Why would you ever want to retire from pro wrestling? You could still do the MMA thing, but if you can make a gazillion dollars or whatever it is that he makes on a contract where you only show up every now and then and you get pushed as hard as he does, he's got the best gig in the world. Why would he ever want to give that up?
Much like you compared it to Hogan's WCW contract from the one that leaked online from '98. If they're dumb enough and thick enough to present him with such a deal, why wouldn't he take it?
Yeah, I mean, again, you could say things about Hogan, and Hogan came out recently and admitted, he goes, yeah, I was a politician for all these years. Of course I was. You're damn right I was. And on some level, I kind of respect the fact that he would come out and even say that. But look, if you were Hulk Hogan and you were working for WCW and they were dumb enough to put all that stuff in a contract and say, here, we'll give this to you. We'll give you a 25% of pay-per-view. We'll give you X percent of merchandise. We'll give you all the things that you want to get. You might be reviled by the other people in the company who are going to be jealous of you. But here you go. Would you sign that contract?
I would. In a second.
I wouldn't worry so much about what other people thought of me. So I don't even fault Hogan for that. That's more of an issue of WCW sort of giving him what he wanted. One of the many, many reasons that WCW is no longer around.
You know, and I promise this will be the last thing I'll pick your brain about. To go to the other end of the spectrum, Daniel Bryan. Solomonster, what has happened there? Is it just not 2014 anymore? It just never got going, did it, his return?
Yeah, I just think it's part of it is time. People moved on. They found other people that they liked. They found other people to get behind. And then the other part of it is the booking. What have they really done with him to make him feel special? They haven't really put him in any sort of major program at this point. I think part of it also is you got to remember when he got really popular in 2013 into 2014. It was we were just talking about Becky Lynch. It's kind of a similar thing. The fans were rebelling against the company's treatment of him. They liked him. He was over. But it wasn't until people just got fed up with him getting screwed over or just not being featured, people started to rebel. And that's when this movement starts and there's really no stopping it. Now, it's been so many years. He's been world champion. He headlined WrestleMania. So he's done all of that already. You know, that same passion just isn't there anymore. It's like been there, done that. They still like him. You know, he still gets the S chance. It's an easy chant to get when you come out. But I think people have moved on to people like Becky and others. And you know, Bryan had his time. But the booking doesn't help him. I don't think that's done him any favors either. So we'll see what they do with him going into WrestleMania. I don't know if they're going to put the championship on him. You know, I would think you maybe put the title on Miz at some point, have Bryan win it from him. But now we've seen that match so many times. You know, does that really feel like a WrestleMania main event level match at this point? I'm not so sure anymore. So it's a combination, I think, of those two things.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said we're just into others. Look back to 2013, there wasn't the AJ Styles of the world, Nakamura. You can mean the Shield weren't really a thing back then. We didn't have the kind of options. You know, I think as an audience, we were clamoring, as you said, for something different, and he was that. And now we have alternatives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we have, and that's right. We have alternatives. Look, that was 2014. It's 2018. That's a long time. That's 4 years. People have moved on. We've got new faces that have come up from NXT. And believe me, I'm sure some of them probably will need all the help they can get from the crowds getting behind them. Some of them maybe also are going to go through the same thing that Bryan went through. So I definitely think that's part of it for sure. But again, it's funny with him. It all goes back to that WrestleMania match where Sheamus, beat him in 18 seconds. I was in the crowd. I was one of the people who were appalled by that. And it just sort of grew from there. So it's kind of funny that the company fought so hard against it for so long until they finally gave in. It was their fault. It was their booking of him that even created that movement in the first place.
I'm sure you're looking forward to WrestleMania being kind of in your neck of the woods this coming year, or next year, I should say.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on that. I am. It is convenient when WrestleMania comes to your backyard. You don't have to pay to go fly anywhere. I can sleep in my own bed every night, which is kind of cool. On the other hand, though, I use WrestleMania. What I've been doing for a long time now is a group of us, and we sort of get together, and it's become my one real vacation each year. So I've had the chance to go to Texas for the first time, and Miami and California. I mean, I live here in the States, and I had never been to any of those places before. So it's always cool to be able to fly and get out of New York and go somewhere else. And now it's like, oh, well, I guess I'm not going anywhere this time. But New York will be a lot of fun. I don't know if you'll be able to make it out for it, but that might be a good excuse for you to finally come to New York. But there's plenty for people to do. And even in terms of the podcast, we're going to have, I'm sure at some point, a big meetup with everybody. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've had to decline the last couple of meetup invitations. It's a little bit too far out for me, but
you could take an Uber.
Yeah, I'll have to break out the communion money for that one. You've got a great community. Audience. I kind of call it a community. Your listenership, because we have the Facebook group, which is, for most part, I always find pretty positive. Do you know what I mean? It's just a bunch of friends, really.
Okay, well, you find it more positive than I do. I'll take your word for it.
Well, I don't have to sift through the stuff, I suppose. I just I can dip in and out.
That is true.
But look, Solomonster, I really, really appreciate you doing this and coming on the Wrestling Beat here on Dublin South FM. Could you let all my listeners know on the station where your podcast can be found? Because I've mentioned you plenty of times before on it, but just let everybody know where you can be found.
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to thesolomonster.com, and that will take you to the landing page with all of the audio. So you can find full episodes of the podcast there. Plus, it's on iTunes. Now we're on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher. So pretty much any app or podcast service, we're probably going to be on there. And then there's the YouTube channel. So if you just hop on YouTube and if you type in the Solomonster, you'll see all my content on there pop up, pay-per-view reviews and little clips from the show, snippets that I'm doing myself now on my own channel. So that would be the place to go. And then, of course, I'm on Twitter at Solomonster.
Yeah, you're quite active on Twitter. And one thing I always want to say about your show is you're consistent, and it's every Sunday. And I don't think you've missed. I don't remember you missing an awful lot of shows, but it was always something I look forward to on a Sunday.
Yeah, I try to be. That's key. And people email me all the time and they say, "Oh, do you have any advice? I want to start my own podcast. Do you have any advice?" And it's easy. You can give advice on what equipment to use or what podcast host to use. But I always say two things. I say, make sure you're consistent and make sure that you find your own voice and you're not just trying to copy somebody else. You just got to be yourself. And some people just don't have the voice for it. It's not their thing. But you got to be consistent. You can't do 2 weeks and then say, I'm kind of bored. I'll do the show again in 3 weeks. You're not going to build an audience that way. So I learned that very early on. And up until this year, this was going to be 8 straight years without missing a single show. So that's that tells you right there. I think consistency is key.
Yeah, you've got a great track record, and you put out a great show every single week. And I love to, when I do check out the episode download, I'm always hoping to see the 2-hour mark, the time mark on it.
It's funny. Everybody says that. I'm the opposite. Like, I would love to look at the timestamp and be like, oh, great, we went 80 minutes this week. That's fantastic. I can't remember the last time I did 80 minutes. They seem to be getting longer, but as long as people enjoy them, that's all that matters.
I think if you dip under 80 minutes, there'll be probably some sort of a riot. It's not going to happen.
People would yell at me. I think you're right. I think they would. They'd be like, "What? I think the file got cut off. What happened here? How come it's so short?"
Yeah, everyone think the sky is falling. But look, it's been really cool for me to talk to you and have you on my show. As I mentioned to you in the email I sent out to you to kind of set this up, is without you doing this show, I certainly wouldn't be doing mine. You've been a pretty big influence on me and how not that I copy it, but as I put together this show, you know what I mean? You've been a pretty good influence on me.
I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Solomonster, thanks so much again. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. My pleasure.